Good morning, class. Let us continue with the plot of the play Trifles by Susan Glaspell, who was an American playwright. So far, we have discussed this play in two parts. Now, this will be the concluding part as far as the story, the action, the plot of the play is concerned. So, we know that two women, that is Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Peters, the sheriff's wife, one is the sheriff's wife and another one is Mrs. Hall, is the neighboring farmer's wife, and they are looking at the abandoned house of Mr. and Mrs. Wright. Mr. John Wright is killed, and Mrs. Minion Wright is taken as the suspect murderer. She is in the custody, and these two women, they want to take some things to her in jail, and that's why they are there in the house, whereas the men, the county attorney and the sheriff, they are looking for some evidence of the murder. They are sure that the wife has killed her husband, but they are searching for the motive, the reason behind that, because there was nobody else in that house, and the man was strangled in bed by putting a rope around his neck. So they are quite sure, it's pretty clear that the wife has killed, because there was no third person in the house. But what they need is the motive, actually, why she had killed him, because they have to prove that in the court later on. Meanwhile, the men go after commenting upon the women's discussion, as they talk about trivial things, trifles. This is a sarcastic comment by the men regarding women's discussion. The two men again go upstairs, and women, they are looking at the quilt, the unfinished quilt that Mrs. Wright was making before the killing of her husband and all that. So they are after some time, Mrs. Hall goes to the cupboard, and they try to find out the sewing box, from which in which she used to, that is Mrs. Wright used to put all her sewing tools, instruments there, the scissors and buttons and all that. While searching in that room, first they come across a bird cage which is open. There is no bird in that, and the door is open, and one door is broken of that cage. And Mrs. Peters asks about this to Mrs. Hall, because as we know, Mrs. Hall happened to be the neighbor to Mrs. Wright. And she tells Mrs. Peters that Mrs. Wright had a canary bird in that cage. Canary bird is a small sweet singing bird. It's a colorful bird. These canaries, they come in bright, beautiful, attractive colors, and especially people put these birds in cages to as a kind of display in their homes. So one crucial thing about Mrs. Wright is that she had no children, and she loved bird, and her actor, she herself was like a bird. She used to sing, she used to wander like a bird. And as Mrs. Hall remembers her, in a white dress and blue ribbon and singing, so she was like a bird herself. So suddenly, when they look at the bird cage, the women become serious, and suddenly they observe, they come to know, they notice that the hinge of the of one door of that bird is of that bird cage is broken, as if somebody forcefully pulled the door, somebody deliberately broken the door. No, this is an alarming thing for these women. Then what happens is that, now they are looking at the quilt, and they are searching for the patches that Mrs. Wright will need for completing her quilt in the jail. So that is what they are thinking about, Mrs. Wright. So when this discussion is going on, suddenly one of the women, they go to the cupboard and they try to take out the sewing box. And when the woman puts hand in the sewing box, she feels her hands wet. She takes the hand to the nose, and suddenly she feels that there is something sticky there. There is blood. And to their horror, the women, Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Peters, they find that there is a bird, there is a dead canary bird in that box. And she had covered, who Mrs. Wright had covered and had hidden that bird in that box, wrapped in a silken cloth. So the bird is killed by somebody ruthlessly, very cruelly. It's by wringing its neck, by twisting its neck. So now this is a great shock. This is something very much. This is something terrible for these women. And Mrs. Peters, she suddenly remembers, and she says, when I was a little girl, I had a kitten, and a boy was there, a cruel boy was there, and he killed that kitten with a small axe hatchet. And she said, in case the people could not have controlled me, I could have she as if she wanted to say that she could have killed the boy, but she controls. And because at the same time there were steps heard, footsteps can be heard, and she controls her speech, and she just says, I could have hurt him, instead of saying I could have killed him. And the women go silent, because they got the motive behind the killing of a husband by his own wife. And that is, the wife was a cheerful kind of person. She is a very kind, enthusiastic kind of woman, whereas the man was, because during the discussion between Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hall, we come to know something about the cruel nature of Mr. John Wright. Overall, he was a good man. That is the definition of a man who pays taxes, who is quiet, and who has a job, who has a home, and all that. But from the women's point of view, all these things are not enough. The man must be kind. The man must respect the woman in his life. The man must be a friend and genuinely, and he must be kind and gentle towards his wife. But John Wright was not such a kind of man, and Mrs. Hall says, when you have no children and you have to live with a husband like John Wright, so this is a terrible thing. So these two women, they come to know the reality that, and but they never express that. They keep it hidden, they keep it a secret, but they knew among themselves that John Wright didn't like his wife's love for the bird, and he has cruelly killed the bird by taking it out of the the cage by wringing its neck. And the woman, that is Mrs. Wright, wanted to bury that bird in a box covered in a silken cloth, and that's why she has hidden that the dead bird in the box in her saving box, and put that in her cupboard. And out of that anger, because of the violence done by the man to her bird, she might had killed her husband. So this can be the motive. And these two women, Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Peters, they come to know that this is the motive. That's why Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Minion Wright, had killed her husband. So they now have no doubt that Mrs. Wright is the killer. And after some time, when the men come downstairs, they ask them, the attorney and the sheriff, they ask them, have you completed, have you taken the clothes, or are you sure whether she was doing the quilt or the knot, etc. That is, which are the trivial matters as far as the men are concerned. And so they again sarcastically ask them, are you done with, and all that. And what do these women do? They hide the box, they hide the dead bird, they take the apron and the things to give it to her, that is Mrs. Wright, in the jail. But they do not disclose, they do not reveal this fact to the men, that there is a dead bird, there is a dead bird in a box, and the neck of the bird is twisted. Somebody has violently killed the bird by twisting its neck. They do not tell this to their husbands, that is the attorney and the sheriff, and even when the men ask them, where is the bird, the women tell, Mrs. Hall tells that the cat might have swallowed the bird. And then the attorney again asks, where is the cat, is there any cat? And they very plainly tell him that the cat might have left the house after the death of a person in that house. But in this way they hide the fact, that is there is a motive for Mrs. John Wright to kill her husband in a fit of madness, in a fit of anger and hatred for killing her bird whom she loved, because she had no children. And here the play ends. So this bird is the central symbol in this play. The cage, the bird cage, also is an important symbol in the play. This bird cage symbolizes patriarchy, and how patriarchy men exploit and they suppress women's freedom and women's life. And when a woman suffers a lot, when that suffering is beyond her tolerance, beyond her capacity to tolerate, this injustice or this exploitation or this suppression, uh, she can be violent and she can retaliate. She can attack, and even she can kill the man who is her husband. So the woman's violence here is the result of the discrimination against women, that is the gender discrimination. And why? Only because the husband is violent, the uh, husband is cruel, and he treats his wife with cruelty. So this play ends with this terrible symbol of the twisted neck of the bird. So the bird in that cage is the symbol of the severity faced by women in this patriarchal world. So we can try to understand, we can study this play from a woman's point of view, with the feminist perspective, and then we realize the greatness of this work of art, this one act play, and its high impact upon the readers or the spectators. So this is an excellent example of women's writing. When a woman writes, how intense her writing could be, how terrible her writing could be, and how she exposes the patriarchal setup, how she reveals the injustice done to women by men. So, and how men treat women and their issues, labeling them as trivial, labeling them as subordinate, and what happens when women are continuously treated like this. So their anger can explode in a terrible violence like this, that results in the killing of that husband, that man who is a representative of this patriarchal setup of the society. So I would like you to go through the text of the play, watch the videos, and you will come to know this theme, and how the writer elaborates upon this theme with an essentially woman's point of view, and how, as readers and scholars of literature, how we can study this play with the feminist lenses, with this feminist perspectives. Thank you.